And joining us now on the debate, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, economist Evelyn, professor in the Department of Community Health Sciences at the University of Manitoba. In the nation's capital, Ken Battle, president of the Caledon Institute for Social Policy. With us here in studio, Tasha Kheiriddin, columnist with the National Post, co-author of the book Rescuing Canada's Right. And once again, Conservative Senator Hugh Segal, we welcome back as well. Good to have everybody. Tasha, nice to see you again here in the studio and our friends in Points Beyond. You have heard Senator Segal make the case for the guaranteed annual income, and now we're going to get into a little bit of debate and discussion about it. And Tasha, I'm going to start with you. Here's you in Rescuing Canada's Right. Quote, please. Research shows that redistributive programs actually encourage the breakup of the family. Case in point, the guaranteed annual income. This is the ultimate statist policy by which the government guarantees all its citizens a minimum standard of living. Shockingly, PC leader Robert Stanfield actually campaigned on the idea against Pierre Trudeau in 1968. Both Canadian and American studies show that far from helping those in need, such policies not only reduce incentives to work, but also lead to greater rates of family dissolution. Why? Quite simply because family members don't need to stay together for economic reasons. In fact, it becomes in their interest not to stay together, as members collect more benefits separately than when they reside in one household. Can you expand on that a little bit, why you think that this actually is not only a bad idea, but can help break up families as well?
Absolutely. I wish it were a good idea because the Senator has made a lot of valid points. We do need to constantly try and alleviate poverty. Nobody likes to see poverty in our country. But studies have been done on the guaranteed annual income. In the 1970s in the United States, experiments were done in a number of states, Iowa, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Indiana. And what they found was that the work effort, first of all, of people who were in the experiment compared to a control group was much less. Married men on average 9%, married women on average 20%. The big jump, though, was for men who were not yet heads of households, single men, who worked an average of 43% less in terms of hours. And the other big finding was that in terms of family dissolution, the control group saw about 80% fewer family breakups than the experimental group. People were much more likely to break up. And this study was replicated in Canada as well. Saskatchewan was one of the provinces where it was done. And it was found that while people in Canada did actually work a bit more, they didn't work as less that the Americans did, the family breakup rate was consistent. And we know one of the biggest predictors of poverty is actually single parenthood. So to me, the guaranteed annual income actually flies in the face of what we're trying to do, which is alleviate the factors that can contribute to poverty.
Am I being hopelessly naive by saying that if you're only staying together for financial reasons, that's not a good thing?
Well, you know what? Some people may say, well, people should all have a chance to be emancipated, do what they want, not on the public's dime, and not, I would say, in this case, where it's actually being incentivized by the state. I agree people in certain situations, women in abusive relationships, obviously you don't want them to stay together, but I don't think that the number of people in this case who split up were all in such a situation.
Studies say, Senator Segal.
Let me tell you about reality on the ground. Reality on the ground is that when Ontario launched its anti-family violence program under Bob Welch, and part of that campaign was to get women to break the silence and call for help and get out of abusive homes. The research indicated that a lot of people, women in those circumstances, didn't do it for precisely the reason that Tasha had laid out. Namely, they couldn't afford to. Well, my view is that every citizen is a citizen. And when a citizen's taxes go up, a citizen's income goes up, Her Majesty takes more under our progressive tax system. When your income collapses, for no fault of your own, there should be, as Mr. Churchill used to say, a balustrade beneath which nobody can fall. And if some marriages that are only tied to finance break up because people find them abusive when they get more independence, I actually don't think that's a bad thing. I think women should have the right to make their own choice. I know it's a radical proposition, but I think they should have the right to make a choice.
But they can make that choice. There are programs for women who are in abusive situations. That's my problem.
Civil service run programs with micromanaging bureaucrats, pettifogging. As a Tory, you can't be in favor of that.
With all due respect, I agree that the GAI has a noble purpose, but it treats everyone the same. That's my main objection, is that apart from the disincentive to work, it treats women who are in abusive situations, want to leave their home, the same as the young man with a university degree who hasn't gone on the labor market yet and might say, well, I'm not going to now because I will earn the money without working.
Tasha, with respect, there is no evidence that anybody wants to be on welfare.
The studies found it. Absolutely not welfare. They found guaranteed annual income.
The studies have indicated quite the opposite.
Let me go get Ken Battle in here and see if he can break the tie. You want to come in on this, Ken Battle?
I want to come in on from a different angle, Steve.
Fire away.
Can I just, this concept of GAI that we're debating, I think we have to just look beneath the words for a minute. For one thing, guaranteed annual income, I think a better term for what GAI enthusiasts are after is a guaranteed adequate income. There are three meanings to this term, and I think it's important to keep them straight because people normally don't in this debate. There's guaranteed income as a program, simply a means to an end, a means to alleviating poverty, and I think that's the way that Hugh's talked about. I'll just give you a quote. My definition of solving poverty, no adult Canadian living beneath the poverty line. But there's a second meaning to GAI, and that's GAI as an objective. I mean, we can have the same objective and meet it with different ways. And I think an excellent example is elderly benefits for seniors. The current system, we have an old age security which goes to virtually all seniors. We have a guaranteed income supplement, which is like a GAI program, which goes to low income seniors. The combination of those two programs provides the closest we have in Canada to GAI. In fact, it's amazing. I was just looking at the figures. Maximum benefits from those two programs come to 75% of the poverty line for single seniors and 100% of the poverty line for elderly couples.
Well, Ken, can I just understand, do you favor or do you not favor Senator Segal's idea?
Well, it depends on what the idea is. I favor the objective, but I don't favor the means that he is putting forward. I think a guaranteed income is not going to get us to where we want. We need a much broader and deeper architecture of benefits, and that's what we've been working on.
Okay,
Caledon.
Evelyn Forget, let me get, as I ask you to weigh in on this, let me also read something to you that Ken Battle wrote in a presentation to the Library of Parliament back in 2008. He wrote, "The hard truth is that tough, complicated problems like poverty and unemployment cannot be solved by simple all-in-one solutions like the GAI, the holy grail of some social advocates. Guaranteed annual income is a brilliantly simple idea, which is why it appeals to many. Too many poor people? Then provide a basic income below which no one will fall. In the words of the renowned social theorist Woody Allen, and I quote, 'Money is better than poverty, if only for financial reasons.'" Now, Woody's still got the best lines. Evelyn, talk to us about this, because I know you did some studies on programs that were in Manitoba that tried to do similar things back in the 1970s. What did you find?
That's right. We actually went back to there were 5 guaranteed income experiments in North America in the 1970s. 4 of them were in the US and 1 was in Canada. The Canadian experiment took place in Manitoba and it was called MINCOM. And we were able to go back and to find statistically the participants in that experiment and to re-examine some of the questions that Tasha raises. And one of the things we found, for example, was that all of those adolescent males who were reducing their work hours by over 40%, we found them in high school. They reduced their work hours because they entered the workforce later. We looked at hospitalization rates and we found a reduction in hospitalization rates among participants in the experiment of between 10 and 12% over the 4-year period of the experiment. Focused specifically in the areas of mental health and accident and injury hospitalizations. And if I can just comment on the research related to family dissolution, we found no evidence of family breakup in Canada, and in fact in 3 of the 4 US experiments there was no evidence of family breakup either. 1 paper and 1 experiment purported to find an increase in the divorce rate. When other researchers, when Kane and Wissaker went back and re-examined the data in 1990 and corrected the statistical errors in the original study, that evidence disappeared entirely.
Well, Evelyn, let me do a follow-up with you. Hang on, let me do a follow-up, which is,
Sure.
Does that program that you studied in Manitoba still exist?
It didn't. It ran from 1974 through 1979. The money stopped flowing in 1978.
How come?
The project ran out of money midway through it. The 1970s were a particularly difficult economic period, so we had simultaneous changes in government in both Ottawa and Manitoba, so it was no longer a priority. And at the same time, the economy was facing interest rates of 18% and inflation rates of 10%, and the new governments felt that there were other priorities.
So it was, you say, you're here to tell us it was working, but it lacked a political constituency at the end of the day.
That's right.
Okay. Tasha, let me get you to comment on some of the things here.
Yeah, I would comment specifically on the family dissolution, because in the U.S. there were a couple of studies, one of which where one of the experiments did not see as much family dissolution. It turned out the people in that experiment were under the impression they would lose their benefits if they split up. And that accounted for a differentiation there. I've read the same studies, and the conclusions that I came to are different from what I've seen, what Evelyn has just said, in terms especially of the work hours for married people. Sure, if a young man goes back to high school, that can be a good thing, but if a married person reduces their hours of work, which did happen, especially the wives in most cases, that gap was enough in many cases to push the family back down to a low income status. Often when the wife would be working and working a certain number of hours, it would help bring the family out of poverty.
Hugh Segal.
May I?
Stand by, Evelyn.
Yeah,
We'll get Hugh and
the
then
trends that Evelyn referenced, I think, are really important in terms of the burden that taxpayers, small business, and others carry. By indicating that there is a measurable reduction in hospitalization, a measurable reduction in engagement with Her Majesty as guests in prison, a measurable reduction in dropout of school, you are actually beginning to affect the huge, costly tax burden pathologies that poverty generates. And so what I understood from what Evelyn was saying was that people in the community and in Manitoba generally, beyond those who were recipients, benefited substantially from the trends in place. And that tells us how we can, by changing this approach to poverty, produce some of the funds we need for other critical areas. I think that's, if I may say so, one of the immense nuggets in the work that Dr. Forget has done.
Evelyn Forget?
Yes, I think he's exactly right. I think that's exactly what we found.
Here's, okay, Hugh Segal, let me get you to speak to this, though. We have heard before politicians say, you know, if only we could do this smarter, we'd have way more money left over to deal with this.
Right.
With the thinking being, you know, we can stop doing the idiocy over here and just focus on doing the good stuff. And that never seems to happen. Government just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and the spending doesn't actually go down in any of these areas. You just got all this new area.
But follow this through for a moment, and I thought that Ken Battle made a very good point about how this actually proceeds on a process basis. If a whole bunch of people who are now getting welfare across Canada become ineligible for welfare because they're getting a basic income tax credit, refundable, right? Then the provinces are going to have money which they are now spending on welfare to either do tax cuts for Tasha or to do investment in other things of one form or another. And the federal government, which will be doing the transfer through the tax system, will be doing what it has done through the tax system for eons in a host of other areas of priority. And
But they probably won't get rid of the civil servants who administer those programs.
But in Ontario, those people who now administer these programs, who are facing the same rate of demographic attrition as anybody else, will over time phase out, and resources can be put into other activities or tax cuts.
Okay, Tasha, then Ken.
It's one pot of money, and whether the federal government or the provincial government is essentially providing what we would consider welfare is irrelevant, because at the end of the day, the Canadian taxpayer is paying tax, whether that money is being used by one level of government or the other. So you're not going to have more money at the end of the day.
But Tasha,
let me finish.
Here's the difference.
You're not going to have more to distribute.
No, but here's the difference. If less people are showing up in hospital, because poverty is the best predictor of showing up in hospital, if less people are going to prison, which costs us $120 grand a year per person.
You have no guarantee that would happen, because because let me say this: if, as the experiments have shown, and as common sense, I hate to say it, would say, if you receive something for doing nothing, there are people who will say, I will stay home, I will live on this, I will manage to live on this amount of money, I will not work. And that perpetuates poverty.
And do you know what the number is of people who are gaming the present welfare system? It's massive.
Ken Battle.
It is as strong as it is anywhere else.
Oh, and my father, who checks these things out about grammar, would want me to say it's not less hospitals, it's fewer hospitals.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Clarify the record for the grammarian nerds out there like my dad. Go ahead, Ken Battle.
Yeah, one of the points I want to make, just to get back to design of programs and what works and what doesn't. GAI is a form of technology for developing social programs, and Hugh mentioned earlier Milton Friedman and actually George Stiglitz even before pioneered this concept of a negative income tax. Well, Canada has really gone a long way in implementing those ideas, and in fact we have a number of sort of proto-guaranteed incomes in our current system, and this is not a trivial point, because I think it's a key to an alternate way of getting at poverty through social programs. If we look at elderly benefits, I mentioned the guaranteed income supplement is a negative income tax program. The Canada Child Tax Benefit is. The working income tax credit that was just brought in to help the working poor is a GAI technology program. Refundable GST credit, provincial child benefits.
Right.
There's a whole range of programs, both federally and provincially, that deliver benefits in a dignified way. They're efficient programs, they're non-stigmatizing, and they're very effective. When we have evidence to that effect. For example, we've cut the poverty rate for low-income families headed by women in half in the last 10 years due to a combination of their increased employment in the labor force, which is crucial, and improvements in child benefits. So, you know, when people say we need a GAI, well, in fact, we already have a number of GAI-style programs, and that's what I think points the way to where we need to go in attacking poverty.
Tasha.
I would concur, because I think you can't equate a GAI for seniors with a GAI for a general population, because seniors are not going to re-enter the labor force. There's no disincentive to work presented. They don't work. And in terms of the single mothers or the women in poverty, and in fact 35% of single mothers are women in poverty, they need specific help that is not covered by a general GAI. If you implement your policy, the problem is you'll set up a general GAI and you'll still need these special programs to tackle the challenges that different groups face. So you're not going to save money, you're not going to necessarily reduce the bureaucracy.
Well, we can learn from the seniors, and Ken is absolutely correct on that front, because in the case of the seniors, the present government has raised the threshold of earnings that seniors are allowed to have while still being able to get the income supplement. So you can make these adjustments over time to make sure that they're both affordable and sustainable. And I think it is. I think it is. No, I know what you're saying. Middle-aged people can be poor and starve, and seniors can't.
No,
I don't agree with that.
Ridiculous.
That's exactly what you're saying. That's what you're saying.
You're saying. As a middle-aged person,
right.
with a child who is working,
right.
I will say that people in my position should be incentivized to work and not disincentivized to work.
Right.
And the problem with the GAI is that is what it would do. My mother, who's a senior, is not going looking for work. She is not.
And what do you say to the 70% of people living beneath the poverty level now, who are single mothers, who will be taxed at 100% if they break out of welfare and try to earn some money on the side?
That is a completely different issue. I agree.
No, it's the exact same issue.
No,
it is precisely the same issue.
Welfare policy should be structured so that there is not that barrier. That's exactly the step-up issue is a big one in welfare policy.
But then you and I agree on that. The
we'll
problem
agree on
is,
that, but the solution isn't
as
what
long
you're
as you leave
suggesting.
rules-based programs in place, you're never going to make progress on that front.
I'm making progress by going to the next graphic. Stand by. I'm going to quote from the Canadian Council on Social Development. This is from a report they did 4 years ago, when they write, approximately 3.5 million Canadians were living in poverty in 2004, more than 11% of the population. In all, 684,000 economic families were living below the poverty line in 2004. 865,000 Canadian children under the age of 18 lived in poverty in 2004, 1 out of every 8 children. There is a poverty problem in this country. This seems indisputable. Question is, how do you want to alleviate it? So, Ken, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah,
can we say, if not, okay, so you're not a fan of the GAI. If not this, which is an idea that Senator Segal is advancing and has explained, if not this, then what?
Let's look at child poverty. Because of the Canada Child Tax Benefit, we've reduced the rate of child poverty by 38%. I mean, we still have an unacceptably high level of child poverty, but there's no question that improvements in benefits like the Canada Child Tax Benefit take a real chunk out of poverty. People misunderstand how much larger the poverty problem would be without it. The other point, again related to child poverty, and I mentioned it a little bit ago, is the fact that increasing labor force participation, along with improvements in child benefits, take a huge chunk out of the poverty rate for single-parent mothers. So, it's, there are solutions, and that's not the only one. I mean, we have to look at childcare, and Tasha made a good point earlier. I want to emphasize it is that another shortcoming of AGAI is that we need services as well as income to deal with poverty. It's not simply something we can just establish a poverty line and that's it, and you're done and gone.
Let me go to
Poverty
Evelyn
is a more
Forget.
complicated problem than that.
Let me go to Evelyn in Manitoba. If not GAI, then what?
Well, I think one of the great advantages of the GAI is that it separates the income security aspect from the specific services needed by particular groups. If social workers aren't spending their time trying to help clients navigate a maze of complex programs they can spend their time assisting families who are receiving services from Children's Aid. They can spend their time assisting people with addiction issues. So I think the separation of those two issues is very important, and the separation by level of government is equally important. Provinces can focus close to the citizen. They can deliver the services that are necessary, whereas the federal government has the fiscal capacity to run a decent GAI program.
Tasha, I think you need to speak to that, because there's a simplicity in this program that doesn't require tens of thousands of bureaucrats to run it, which is the problem, many say, with what we have today.
But Steve, we already have that program now.
Stand by, let me get Tasha.
Evelyn just said those folks wouldn't be fired, they'd just be doing something else. So perhaps
more constructive.
Well, constructive is in the eye of the beholder, and the point of your idea is to reduce the bureaucracy. If you think that's constructive, then according to what she just said, the GAI wouldn't. It would simply redirect people already working in the system to doing other things, and they would still be paying the GAI as well. So we're not saving the money. My issue is, just to say briefly, I think that it sounds simple, and it's as simple as the GAI. The best policy against child poverty or any kind of poverty is obviously a job, and encouraging strong economic development by having lower taxes, by having an economy that functions well, that can provide jobs, and yes, offering the help to people to participate in the labor force, such as single women, for example, who may need a child care supplement, is far better than universal type programs like Quebec $7 a day daycare, where a lot of poor people can't even access the program because there's so much demand in certain areas, whereas wealthy people in areas with lower demand do. These kinds of universal programs like a GAI often fail.
Ken, you wanted to say?
Well, just again, I mean, this assumption that a GAI is something new and different. I mean, let's look at child benefits. We have a GAI program now. It's administered through the federal income tax system. A number of provinces also piggyback on that. It provides benefits in a fair, transparent manner. It substantially reduces poverty. That is a GAI. It uses exactly the same design mechanism as a GAI. It's just that it has a different title to it.
Senator Segal.
Well, I think Ken's point is an appropriate one. We're not as far away from completing the circle as some would have us believe. We have the GST tax credit, we have the gains program in place, we have the child tax credit, which the Caledon Foundation did a huge job in helping to shape. And by the way, governments like the Harris administration and the Krejci administration came around the design that was shaped by the Caledon Foundation. So this can be done without regard to where you are on the spectrum. The issue is, how do we begin to finish the pie so we don't have high levels of unemployment amongst people of working age in a context that is amongst the worst in the developed world, and which actually is a burden on our productivity and economic growth.
It's not by throwing basically a guaranteed annual income at people who will be disincentivized to work by doing that.
But Tasha, tell me this, if we're halfway there, what would be the harm?
No, we aren't halfway. That's the point. The assumption is, because we have GAI type programs for specific sectors, that we need a GAI for everybody with an income floor. This is false. I mean, Milton Friedman, who came up with this idea in the United States, had a concurrent idea, which was to phase out retirement programs. Social Security in the US, he wanted people to save for it himself. He didn't just want to create this kind of huge benefit package for everyone to live off of and to keep getting benefits from the state. So you have to be careful when you say, you know, the right was in favor of this. Like I said, experiments showed big problems with the GAI, and the main one comes down to human nature.
And in Canada, what would be phased out by this kind of program would be provincial welfare costs, which run in the tens of billions.
They'll be uploaded to the federal government, so it's the same pot you're
difference
taking
is, the difference
from
is
Hugh.
through the tax system, it is progressive, and it's not micromanaged by thousands of civil servants who tell other human beings how to live their lives, which you're actually prepared to do.
What? No, I'm
yes,
not.
You are.
No, I'm not.
You're eager to do it. You would enjoy making poor people perform to your level of what you deem appropriate. I think people should be treated as citizens and have the respect to make their own decisions about their own lives.
I think certain universal programs are a mistake because they treat the wealthy the same as the poor. They divert resources that could help the poor to the wealthy, such as Quebec's $7 a day daycare. And I know examples of people making very good incomes who are using that program when poor people do without.
This is good, but I'm going to go to, I want to quote Father Raymond D'Souza, who's an occasional guest on this program, and actually, Tasha, had a piece in your newspaper not too long ago on this very issue. And then, Evelyn, I'll get you to comment on this first. The right supports the negative income tax because it removes market distortions and shrinks the role of the state. The left, because a guaranteed annual income is the most fundamental entitlement program. Why don't we have one? The right is nervous about the work disincentive. And the left doesn't trust the poor to spend their money without government supervision. Senator Segal and I disagree on the causal factors of poverty. He thinks poverty causes negative social incomes, while I tend to think the reverse. Yet once poor, the same problem remains: how to get out of poverty. At the very least, a negative income tax would be as effective as our current approach and far simpler. I agree with the senator that it would actually prove far more effective. A negative income tax, which put money in the hands of the poor, immediately would likely be more stimulative than building a bridge a year from now. So it might be good policy for this crisis, or it might simply be good policy whose time has finally come. Okay, Evelyn.
God bless Father D'Souza.
I think that's a brilliant and eloquent statement.
You're signing on to that.
I have nothing to add to that. That's perfect.
Tasha?
Well, I'd like to say, who will set the GAI? Who will set that floor? This is the other elephant in the room, because like any other program, there will be lobbying in favor of, the amount. So you will have groups saying it should be increased, increased, increased. So the savings that you say you'll get from cutting the bureaucracy will not be there, because the GAI itself will keep going up and up with pressure on successive governments to raise it. That pressure will be very severe.
Ken Battle, do you worry about the work disincentive that's been talked about so far?
No, I tend to be a doubting Thomas about that. That's always brought up about social program reform, that it's going to create a disincentive for people to go into the workforce. And I don't see it that way. But there is a problem with the welfare wall. There's no question. And again, I go back to, there are a variety of things that have to be done to lower that welfare wall, to get people off of assistance into the workforce, because there's no question the best social program is a job. Mm-hmm. It's simple, it's simplistic, but it's still true. We've got to get people out of the system, and we've come up with some proposals to radically change welfare, turn it into a totally different kind of a system where people would get assistance to get off. And that's crucial. But this fantasy about legions of bureaucrats who are operating these programs, that's we're talking about welfare there. Welfare is only one program among a variety. And most of the programs we have, both social insurance, income-tested programs, and universal programs, are very efficient to run. They don't have vast armies of people operating them. And in that sense, I think this notion of the savings from moving to AGII is illusory.
Let me get Hugh Segal to comment on that. Are you exaggerating the potential savings from this? He seems to think there are not these legions of bureaucrats out there who are administering the current programs.
Ken is correct about the programs that he's talked about, the proto-GAI kinds of programs that already exist for certain segments of the population. They are not bureaucrat heavy. I want to extend that principle to welfare in the provinces and the municipalities, which actually does have a high administrative cost component. And
Absolutely.
the way to do that is through, in my view, a program where everybody fills out their taxes honorably and honestly. And by the way, if you make a fraudulent declaration on your taxes, that's a much more serious crime than gaming a welfare officer, just so we're clear. And based on that, they get topped up automatically, or they don't, for however may be necessary in terms of the way the program is defined.
Tasha, let me get you to speak to this.
That's a very passive approach to social policy. I mean, people who are on assistance now, yes, we want to break down the welfare wall. We need a totally revamped system. But they've got to get, they need more help to get off of assistance into the workforce. And that requires broadening support for people, both through income and services, not just for people on welfare, but for the working poor too. We haven't talked enough about working poor. The Whitby program that the Conservative government brought in is an incredibly important step forward. So, but again, back to my thing, it is a more complicated solution than simply AGAI, and I don't think AGAI is going to do it.
Okay, let me put this to Tasha Kheiriddin, though, because you sound through the course of this discussion like you're actually, in some ways, defending the status quo of the welfare program.
No.
You prefer the current welfare system to the GAI that Senator Segal's putting forward. And I wonder whether you really feel comfortable defending a program which, you know, I can't find too many people who like being on welfare, who like the hoops they have to dance through to get on welfare, who like following all the rules they have to follow in order to be eligible for welfare. All of that, I think, is a mess.
No, I don't like the idea that our programs are inefficient. Clearly, some of them are inefficient. Some of them need to be changed. I don't like the welfare wall that exists. I agree with other guests that has to be changed. But I disagree with the solution here. Streamlining programs, getting rid of bureaucratic inefficiency, yes. Creating a whole other program, absolutely not. And how would this work exactly? If you fill out your income tax form, you do that once a year, does that mean that you're assuming that person's needs the following year would be the same as the previous year, that the top-up they receive will be continuously required, or that it will be, maybe they'll need more, maybe they would need less, you don't know? No, let me finish, because it's very important. People on welfare, the idea is that they don't stay there for a long period of time. It's supposed to be transitory. The GAI basically entrenches the idea that you should never earn less than a certain amount of money, that you will always be at a certain minimum threshold. Welfare should be a step up, to paraphrase Lyndon Johnson, a hand up, not a hand out, but still, we should not entrench that as a permanent entitlement. Which
Equal time for Senator Segal.
GST tax credit, when it was brought in, which was automatic based on filling your taxes.
So little amount of money.
Let me tell you how it worked, though, because you seem to be interested in how the system actually works. The way it worked was people didn't have to wait a whole year to file. They could get the money in advance, and if their income changed, so did the GST tax credit, which is why we got students all over Canada to register and to file their taxes so they could be topped up. We actually have an instrument in place which is adjustable. People can be paid on a quarterly basis. They can be paid all in one. There's a million ways.
So you need a lot of people to administer that,
and the tax system does it now automatically at no extra cost. That's the point. You don't need bureaucrats on the ground in welfare offices to do that. That's the only case I'm trying to make.
Senator Segal, the amount of money you get back for GST refund is not comparable to if somebody is below a certain threshold.
Let me try this with Evelyn Forget. Evelyn, tell me this. If this is such a compellingly obvious and good idea, how come it hasn't happened yet?
Well, I think you answered that question just a minute ago. The political right is worried about the work disincentives, and the political left doesn't quite trust people to make their own decisions and choices.
So there's still not the political will for this to happen?
I think so, but at the same time, I'd like to say that everybody I talk to is hungry for big ideas. I'm not sure what would happen if this became a general topic of debate. I don't know what answer we'd come up with, but I think most people seem to recognize the current system is not working. We need to make changes, and we'd like to talk about some of those big ideas.
Is this considered a big enough idea?
It is to me.
It is to you. Senator Segal?
I'm not blaming you for this, but in the last TV debate, which was chaired by a very distinguished journalist.
Can't remember him.
For various reasons, poverty didn't come up.
I can tell you why.
Discussed. Tell me why.
Because I think you're referring to me
as
the guy who chaired the debate.
Yep.
Because we took our cues from the Canadian people. We took the questions that came in from the Canadian public and asked what the majority wanted asked.
And as a person living on the street, spends 82% of his time trying to figure out where he's going to sleep that night and what he's going to eat, it should not be surprising that they're not actively engaged in our political narrative.
You're right about that.
But that doesn't mean you turn your back on them.
And
That's
those
all
people
I'm
wouldn't,
saying.
under your system, even be filing a tax return and wouldn't benefit from it. They'd
Why-
fall through
why
the
would they
cracks.
not?
Because most homeless people do not have an address
They
and
have
do not
health-
file.
they have health
okay,
cards
if you
now
think
'cause
that
somebody
most
reached
street
out
people
to
are
make sure they
filing
applied.
tax returns,
They have no incentive.
I can't
They have
even
no
argue that's
incentive to
ridiculous.
now. And you would give them less incentive. And they cost us $120,000 a year being on the street, less expensive to put them on the...
$120,000 a year on the
Absolutely.
street?
Let me jump in for a
Talk
second.
to businessmen in Calgary who will give you that
You're talking about how
number.
much it is
I got a minute and a half here.
in jail.
Ken Battle, come on in. I got a minute and a half. Take 30 seconds of come on in here and tell me where you think this debate's going.
I think one of the difficulties is there's enormous resistance to change, whether it's GAI, whether it's the programs that Caledon is proposing, because we've got very large changes in the system that we've been advocating for some years. There's just no question that incrementalism is the normal way of doing business, and that there is a lot of resistance, sort of institutional inertia to change. But one positive thing, and I just, because it's not all negative, a number of provinces have initiated poverty reduction campaigns, which I think are a real step forward because governments are actually going on record as putting forward formal poverty reduction targets and means to achieve them. And I think that what's happening in the provinces holds out far more promise than a sterile debate about guaranteed income that we've had for decades and will keep having for decades. It's just not going to happen.
Ken, I'm out of time. But I'll tell you something. There was nothing sterile about the debate we had today. I thought that was pretty good. And you know what's really interesting? You two are in the same party. Is that
I'm not in the party anymore, but
You're
we
not in
were.
the-
We were. We were comrades.
That's a pretty big
I
tent.
rest my case.
That's a pretty big tent.
I rest my case.
Evelyn Forget at the University of Manitoba, Ken Battle at the Caledon Institute for Social Policy in Ottawa. Thanks so much for joining us on the line tonight, you two. And Tasha Kheiriddin from the National Post, Senator Hugh Segal, the conservative, not progressive conservative, maybe in his heart, but not actually, conservative senator from Ottawa. Thanks so much. Good to have both of you here as well.